Hey, what's up you guys? My name's Jamie and welcome to the Ionic Infinite Scroll tutorial. And this is something that allows you to scroll down to the bottom of the page and show a loading icon and load more data from a server or just whatever you want to do. It's typically from a server like Firebase or something like that. And so this app I have right here just loads the numbers 0 through 9 and then shows the loading more data when you scroll to the bottom of the screen. And then it actually has a limit, so once it's reached 5 requests for more data, it will actually disallow further requests. So now it will no longer show the loading, so that's kind of to simulate no more data left on the back end. So I'm going to show you how to build this entire app right now. It's not going to take very long. I know you guys are going to love it and enjoy the content. So this is just a great way to load data in your apps, because often you have so much data on the back end, like such a big list of data, that if you tried to fetch it all at once, the app would crash or you would overload the back end. One of those two things. Alright, so I just have my own blank project right here. It's called Ionic Infinite Scroll, and this is what it looks like right now. If you don't have your own blank project or just some project to work in, then be sure to check out my video on installing Ionic, and then we'll get you set up with your own blank project. Alright, and I'm just going to get a basic starting place from the docs right here. Just going to copy this infinite scroll and the ion list. Alright, then I'm just going to paste it right in here inside of this div in the ion content. And then, so the infinite scroll is configured like this. There's a threshold of 100 pixels, and what the threshold is, from the docs, that's kind of like how far from the bottom of the screen the content needs to be scrolled up in order to call the infinite scroll. And this can either be in percent or in a pixel value. So let's go and just check that out real fast. So here we are, here's the app, and I'm going to scroll down, and then we see there's the loading more data animation. And we have an error here. That's because we haven't fully defined all the stuff yet, specifically the load data event. So we already know what the threshold is. And then there's this event called Ion Infinite, and that's just the event that happens every time the user scrolls to the bottom and reaches whatever threshold that is. And so a function is called every time that event occurs, and then it passes in any event data. And so we need to define that in the TypeScript. I'm going to define it like this, just load data, and then it's going to set a timeout for 500 milliseconds. So half a second, and then it's going to console.log done. And then it also needs to call event.target.complete, and that's just how it lets the infinite loader know that the data has been loaded, and then it can stop showing the loading icon. Alright, so that is the Ion Infinite event. That's, again, what happens every time they reach the bottom of the screen, or whatever this threshold is. Alright, and then inside of the Ion Infinite Scroll, there's an Ion Infinite Scroll content. And then inside of there, you can configure what you want the spinner to look like. So the loading spinner can be one of many different things. So here it says it can be bubbles, circles, crescent, dots, lines, line small, null, or undefined. And so if it's null or undefined, it's just going to default to whatever the default is for either Chrome or Safari or iOS or Android. It's different depending on whatever platform it is. And so that's all we're doing right here when we're configuring the loading spinner. And the loading text is just what the message says when it's showing the spinner. All right, and you don't have to show anything there if you don't want to. Like, we could remove the loading text and it would omit it, but I'm going to leave it here. All right, and now let's populate the list so that it's actually kind of a more full example. So inside of the ion list, I'm going to make an ion item and just kind of repeat it for some data in the TypeScript. So I'll say ng4, and this is so that we can like load more items every time we reach the bottom of the page, because infinite scroll only really works if you actually have more data that populates. It doesn't really do much if it's just like a blank page. So I'm going to repeat for let's item of items, And then I'm going to put the item in here. So this is just a list that I'm going to make in a second. And then, yeah, so let's make it right now. So say items is equal to the empty array. And then in the constructor, I'm going to load up some items. I'll make a function for it actually. So add more items, because we're going to want to call this function every time the user reaches the bottom of the page so we can load more items. So we're just basically going to push the numbers 0 through 9 onto this list. And we're going to call add more items in the constructor. So we'll start out with some items, and then every time the infinite scroll reaches the bottom and it says I want to load more data, so it shows the spinner, that's what happens right here. I'm going to say this add more items once again. So every time they reach the bottom, it'll add more items. All right, and it will push them onto the end of the list. All right, so let's check that out. So here we go. We have the numbers 0 through 9. And then if I scroll down, then it loaded more data. You saw the animation. I'm going to slow down the animation so you can tell even more. I'm going to slow it down to be like 2 seconds. Right, let that reload, and then scroll down. There it says loading more data. And you can see now why we need a list, because we want to be able to scroll down again. So scroll down once again, and it says loading more data. And we can just keep doing that, and it will keep doing it. And it starts loading like before I reach the bottom completely, and that's that. Again, that configuration we have in the HTML, this threshold, 100 pixels from the bottom. So that last time it loaded more data before I was even at the bottom. So this is just a great way to load data in your apps, because often you have so much data on the back end, like such a big list of data, that if you tried to fetch it all at once, the app would crash or you would overload the back end. One of those two things. And so or it would take forever. I guess it might actually complete, but you really don't want to do that. You really want to, if there's a lot of data, you want to do something like infinite load, or maybe even pagination, which is like pages of data. But I like infinite scroll. It's kind of a good user experience. The user can just load more and more data. And so if you guys like the video, be sure to leave a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate that. And then let's look at just a little bit more of configuration. So we already talked about the loading spinner, and we talked about the loading text. But over here in the Ionic scroll, there's a couple more things we can do. We can do disabled. So like, let's say that after a certain point, we've reached all the data from the backend, so there's no more data. Well, what we can do is, let's just make a variable here called like times left, maybe num times left, and set that equal to 5 or something like that. And then every time they load the data, we're gonna decrement that value. So we'll say this dot num times left minus equals 1. All right, so they only have like 5 page reloads. And then what we can do is we can bind to that disabled property like so. So we just bind to disabled, and it's disabled if the num times left is less than or equal to 0. All right, so let's go and check that out. And by the way, this could be a Boolean variable if you wanted, but here I'm just directly checking to see if the number's less than or equal to 0. All right, so we're gonna load the first one. So that's 1, that's 2, 3, 4, 5, and now we've exhausted all 5 attempts. And so now we're at the bottom and it does not show any more loading animation, and we can't load any more results. So that's just a cool little trick you can do to make sure that your user has a good experience once you know there's no more data left on the back end or whatever. Alright, and then the next thing we can look at is the position. By default, the position of the infinite scroll is going to be at the bottom. Okay, so that's this. But it can actually be at the top as well. So like you could have the user scroll up in order to load the results. I'm not going to show that, but you can configure the position attribute. I'll show you how you would do that. You would just do this, position equals, and then it was top. Okay, but I'm not going to do that. Alright, and that's really all there is for the infinite scroll. If you like this video, be sure to leave a thumbs up. I'd really appreciate that. And also leave a comment down below what you think of the video. Do you have any questions or comments? Any thoughts? I'd love to hear it. And subscribe for more videos like this if you're interested, and I will see you guys in the next video.